massive lung damage on the initial x-rays. Despite all of Urbani's efforts, Johnny Chen will die in 10 days.
When those cells are destroyed, if something goes wrong there, you have a very serious problem because, first of all, your exchange of the CO2 and the O2, so the normal exchange doesn't happen anymore, and also you start a process of leaking.
Carlo Urbani is alarmed. He implements hygiene and quarantine measures primarily to protect the healthcare personnel. He examines the patients for 6 days and finally puts an end to the conspiracy of silence about this new illness.
Hi Kevin, this is Carlo. I have a hospital full of crying nurses. People are running and screaming and totally scared. I don't know what it is, but it's not the flu, yeah? Can you call Pascal and Lam Geneva?
We learned an awful lot about, really in many ways, compared to soccer, I felt like we've been playing 4th division and doing it quite well, and all of a sudden somebody put us in the 1st division, and the demands and the time you had to do things and the expectations just grew exponentially, and I think we just about managed to do it, but I was that close. We were so close so many times to the whole system imploding.
For years, John Oxford from London's Royal Hospital has been studying archival records about the 1918 flu epidemic. During this time, US researchers decrypted the genetic code of H1N1 and reanimated the virus in the lab. They grafted the H protein onto a very normal seasonal flu, thus turning it into a killer virus. John Oxford is certain what succeeded in the laboratory can happen naturally at any time, the perfect example being the Spanish flu. Like SARS, the bird flu of 1918 afflicted deep regions of the lung, but it was significantly more contagious. John Oxford found tissue samples from flu victims in the hospital pathology collections. One thing is certain, influenza viruses are far more aggressive than SARS.
SARS was very easily knocked on the head. It was easily killed. It was easily finished by simple things like quarantine, social distancing and hygiene. Now, influenza would never be stopped by quarantine and social distancing. Never, never, never.
Let's assume that SARS had acquired the trait of being infectious before the onset of symptoms. That would have been a major problem for us. Influenza would seem like child's play in comparison.
CDC headquarters in Atlanta is on red alert. Flu expert Tim Uyuki is preparing to leave for Hanoi to assist Carlo Urbani. Yet urgent questions are still unanswered. Which face masks should he take? Will flu medications help? Uyuki and Urbani have been in contact via email and telephone for days. But then things take an unexpected turn.
I arrived in Hanoi on the evening of March 11th, 2003, and on that very day in Hanoi, Dr. Urbani had developed a fever.
Carlo Urbani, despite the fever, has flown to a conference in Bangkok. After being rushed to the hospital, the doctor knows he must have been infected with the mysterious virus. Four days later, Singapore Airlines SQ-25 from New York lands in Frankfurt. Passenger Ho Nam Leong, a physician from Singapore, was at a conference in the US and became ill. As he boarded the plane to Frankfurt, he called one of his colleagues, who in turn notified WHO. A quarantine ambulance is already awaiting his arrival at the airport. Head of Operations Renee Gottschalk puts all 250 passengers under quarantine. The patient himself is taken to the university clinic. Head virologist Hans Richard Brott and his team will be wearing protective suits while treating him over the course of several weeks.
Sancho, baby, chill.
Patients with suspicious cases
Chill.
of pneumonia in Singapore, including Esther Mock, one of the 3 flight attendants from Singapore who was infected in the Metropole Hotel. The deadly pathogen from Asia came through the US to Europe in the body of her doctor. Samples are immediately sent to high-security laboratories in London and Hamburg. The physicians in Frankfurt will save Dr. Leon. The SARS attack was warded off in Germany.
The SARS virus was really quite enough for us. A germ that in part can jump from one super spreader patient to 170 others, and that is lethal in 10% of the cases. That is a highly dangerous germ.
Reacting to the SARS case at the Frankfurt airport, WHO headquarters in Geneva now rolls out their heaviest artillery. For the first time in its history, the World Health Organization issues a global alert. In order to give this demon a name, WHO labels it Severe Acute Respiratory Syndrome, abbreviated SARS.
Instead of dealing with one distressed member state, we were dealing with 192 distressed member states. And the political and the communications aspects of that. How does WHO maintain credibility? By putting out credible messages, while at the same time not providing too much reassurance about what we don't know.
Blood and tissue samples from the infected arrive simultaneously at 13 high-security labs around the world. Recipients include Stefan Becker in Marburg, Christian Drosten in Hamburg, and Albert Osterhaus in Rotterdam. In a telephone marathon, WHO persuaded the prestigious labs to sacrifice individual credit and collaborate in dismantling the SARS pathogen. Without a test for SARS, they will be unable to distinguish it from a simple cold in the early stages of the disease. Under the strictest security, for the first time the SARS virus is seen beneath electron microscopes. Its genome is decoded. It isn't until much later that researchers discover the SARS virus originates from bats and that it was transmitted to humans from civets. Civets are a culinary specialty in southern China.
It took exactly 1 week from the first samples being placed in a cell culture in Frankfurt to identification here in Hamburg. And for 4 days of this week, the cell culture just sat around. You have to admit, that was extremely fast.
Das ist natürlich extrem schnell, das muss man schon sagen.
It was unique in history. I think that you had a human virus disease or a human infectious disease, and that the problem was solved basically in a month's time. If you would have led that to the normal system of competition, it would not have worked. It would have taken much longer, and I'm even afraid that it would have gone to a pandemic situation, that particular virus would have spread worldwide.
It's unprecedented in human history that a disease has emerged into the human population in an explosive fashion and has been put right back in the box within, in evolutionary terms, a tiny amount of time. So I think the world has to take great credit for that. I think, on the other hand, what we learned is, well, are we vulnerable?
For days now, Carlo Urbani has been fighting for his life in a quarantine station in Thailand. On this Saturday morning, his heart stops beating. Carlo Urbani dies at 11:45 a.m.
To this day, there is no cure for the SARS virus. There is no vaccine. So doctors can't do anything but simply treat the patient's symptoms to keep them alive. And with SARS, the main organ affected is the lung. The virus massively reduces lung capacity, especially in older patients. And in the end, they suffocate from within.
In Atlanta next year, they will continue their exercise of the bird flu outbreak because a mutated influenza virus is the next most likely enemy. The CDC experts will close airports and schools, organize ambulance services, distribute medication, and secure the supply of foodstuffs, or of coffins. The logistics they claim can be used for any sort of outbreak, whether caused by a new, unknown virus or by a bioterror attack. Infected persons will be able to slip through any border controls. At the beginning, it's always a fight against an invisible enemy.
It's a global community now, where we're all spending half our time running around the world. And so we're all at risk. It doesn't matter where it starts, it will be on our doorstep within 24 hours.